It must be you to help me make it through my days and nights. It must be you to hold me when I need a friend. My definition of heaven on earth might be short and sweet. It must.
Shalom and welcome to Taped with Rabbi Doug Legg, who will be with us today. My guest today is Dr. Justin Gordon. And Dr. Gordon is an optometrist here in Chicago, my optometrist, but that's not why I have him here today. He is a postal historian and specializes in history of the Holocaust. And tell us what a postal historian is, Dr. Gordon.
A postal historian is someone that collects the whole envelope stamp and all the markings that are on the cover. A cover is a term that we use for an envelope with a stamp on it. And a postal historian, as I say, collects the whole thing with all the markings. This way he can trace where the envelope or the cover started, where its destination was, sometimes how it got from place A to place B. And some of us postal historians actually take this a step further and study the events in history that take place as this cover is traveling. That's what I will present tonight.
Tell me something. Would you also be a stamp collector as well?
I happened to start out as a stamp collector when I was about 8 years old. I have a father who's a coin collector and an uncle who was a stamp collector, and I was close to my uncle, and he got me started, and I liked stamps a whole lot more than coins at that point. Now I probably would do a little differently.
Yeah, I would imagine so. Well, tell us about these Holocaust items that you have, if we can take a look at the screen, that you've brought with you, and tell me what these are all about.
Okay, what I do generally is start at the beginning here. As you know, right after World War I, the Weimar Republic was established in Germany, and it failed miserably. In the mid-20s, Hitler started to come to power and started with his beer hall harangues, and he blamed the woes of the German people on the Jews, of course. And one of the things that started happening is anti-Semitism started to flare up in the mid-20s. And here we have a back of an envelope with an anti-Semitic label, a postal label that was put on there. This one in particular says, "Do not buy by Jews, do not buy Jewish items." Here's an example of a label that says, "Do not read Jewish newspapers." And these were commonplace in the late 20s.
In Germany?
In Germany and in Austria after the Anschluss, although Austria started to come along with Germany. Hitler was originally from Austria. Hitler came to power in March of 1933, and he immediately started to change the laws as they reflected towards the Jews, and he took away their citizenship, he took away their ability to practice their professions, he took away their university degrees, and in 1937, one thing that he did add, that he required all Jewish people to add a middle name to their names. All females had to add the middle name of Sarah, as reflected in this item in the top left-hand corner. You see the return address. It says Martha Sarah Lippman. And all men had to add the middle name of Israel. And this says Alfred Max Israel is the middle name over here. Another better example is this Dr. Alfred Israel Karpin, consultant, underneath that. And that was the term, and actually it's a doctor, and the term doctor in pre-war Germany indicated that this gentleman was a lawyer and not a medical doctor. A medical doctor was called Herr, a lawyer was called doctor.
Tell me something about the name Israel. What if somebody did not print their stationery or their return address with the Israel in the middle? Would there
probably be subject to arrest or fine or some sort of black mark put against them by the Nazis, arrest or taken away. This was one way that the Nazis were able to censor the mail by looking at this middle name. They could tell that this was particularly a Jewish item, and they can open it up and read the contents and censor what was going on.
Before we move on to the next item, let me ask you this question. how does one come about finding these items and collecting them to begin with? Are there postal historical shows, like there would be stamp shows?
There are stamp shows, and at these stamp shows, various dealers may have different items like this for sale. And generally, I initially started out by going to different shows, and I bought at auctions. There are auction dealers that specifically deal with items from Germany or from Holy Land, and this particular area can fall into both items from Germany or Germany, or items that are represented from the Holy Land because it represents the Holocaust, which was a Jewish event. So I started to collect both at shows, but searched in auctions that particularly were aimed towards German items or Jewish Holy Land type items. And that's where I felt. Over the years, I've developed a relationship with many dealers throughout the world, and they know if they acquire or have access to an item that I'm interested in, they will immediately call me or fax me and send me a copy of the particular cover or item and ask if I would want to purchase it.
How long have you actually been collecting items from the Holocaust?
I started in the mid-'70s. When I finished my training as a doctor, I found I had all this time to fill that I was studying and I was doing. And when I opened my practice, I had this extra time, and I picked up my stamp collecting again. And I started just to put stamps on a page, and I happened to attend a show at the old Sherman House downtown. And in that particular show, there was an exhibit on the general government. That was the area inside of Poland that the Nazis carved out, where all the cities in the general government had ghettos set up, and all the concentration camps, except for 2 of them, were set up in the general government. And within this exhibit, where they were showing the different stamps that were issued in the general government, there was a couple items from the Auschwitz concentration camp and from a number of their ghettos, and this piqued my interest. I grew up in Hartford, Connecticut, in a frum community where many of the people that I associated were survivors of the Holocaust. So I had a background. The chazan that taught me my bar mitzvah was an inmate in Auschwitz when he was 13 years old, and our family happened to be pretty close to him. And when it was quiet and when the other buchers weren't around, I asked him questions, and he would tell me stories about his captivity in Auschwitz. And this is how I got interested. And I sort of put my interest in history together with my stamp collecting and sort of acquired items that are involved with the Holocaust.
How interesting, how interesting.
This is another example of the Israel middle name from a dentist. As I said, all the professionals had their degrees taken away. The lawyer had his degree taken away, the dentist had his degree taken away, and he could not practice seeing patients or clients.
Not even Jewish ones?
From the general population. All Aryans he couldn't see, and he could only consult or see Jewish clients or see Jewish patients. Because Hitler decreed that anyone that was Jewish was not a doctor, was not a dentist, was not a lawyer anymore by having their degrees revoked. Also in the mid-'30s, an exhibit was put together talking about all the characteristics of Jews and their traits. It was called the Imre Juden, the ugly Jew or the wandering Jew, roughly translated from the German. And as you can see, the representation of the exhibit was a Jew with his kapata and his payas and his beard and his hand held out with gold coins in it. This was the characteristic of a Jew. Also, Hitler associated the Soviet Union at that time with the Jews. That's why the map and the hammer and sickle in the corner there.
Yes.
And this exhibit had rows and rows of pictures of Jewish noses and Jewish faces and Jewish ritual items that were put on exhibit and shown how these Jews lived and how these Jews acted and how to recognize a Jew. And this traveled all through Germany and Austria at the time. And in each of these exhibits, there would be a post office set up, and stamp collectors, one of the areas of stamp collecting is collecting souvenir cancels, like over here in the right-hand corner. You can see the postcard is actually blank, And a cancel was put on there, and it's a cancel from this particular exhibit called the Ingwe Juden. This one is blank and was probably handed to the clerk at the post office, and he stamped it and was handed back to the collector so he could put it into his collection. This one was actually traveled through the mail, but this is also considered what they call a philatelic item, where a stamp collector probably prepared this cover, had it stamped, and sent to another stamp collector in a different city.
Very interesting.
This is a fascinating cover. This is a voter's registration card to remind the person that it's addressed to that an election is coming up and that it's his obligation to vote. The stamp in the lower left-hand corner indicates that this person took the card to the voting poll and voted, and they applied that stamp. The back card reminds the person of the election where the voting place is, and I'd like to read the translation of the bottom paragraph there. This is really fascinating. A person who exercises his right to vote, even though he has been denied that privilege, or is a Jew, or is known to him that at least 3 grandparents were Jews, or is a product of a mixed marriage, at least 2 Jewish grandparents, and married to a Jew, is required to return this voter registration card to the district office and is expected to stay away from the voting place. If he does otherwise, he is subject to heavy punishment.
Wow.
So the laws governing Jews in 1938 even forbid them to vote in the general elections that took place.
April 10th, 1938.
This is a postcard from the Dachau concentration camp. You can see that it's dated June 12th of 1933. Hitler came to power in March 5th. He was elected as head of the German state and then declared himself dictator weeks later. And the first official concentration camp was opened on March 22nd of 1933, about 3 weeks after he came to power. An interesting item on how I acquired this particular postcard. One day after I came home from the office, there was an auction catalog that my wife gave me, and she knows at that time I liked to page through them. This is before I had kids and everything else. And I started to go through the catalog, and there were a whole series of lots with postcards from the Dachau concentration camp. And I started to read them, and then I did a double take and read them again. And the first item was listed as being canceled just like this, but the date was March 22nd, 1933. And us stamp collectors get a little crazy when we find an item that is actually canceled on the day of an event like the opening of the Dachau concentration camp. So the next day I called the proprietor of the auction house and mentioned this to him. And even before I had a chance to say that this item, which he didn't mention in the description, was from the first day of the camp, he goes, 8 other collectors have called me already and told me that. And I said, I'd like to bid on this. And there was so much interest in this particular postcard that this particular postcard was going to be auctioned off by phone. So the night of the auction, I had a phone number to call before, and I held on to the phone until this item was put on the block. And the bidding started, and the first time the bidding came around to me, the item was already priced at about $400. And this is the late 70s, and $400 to me, just starting in practice, was a lot of money.
Sure.
So I bid $450. Came around to get to me, it was almost $1,000. And I'm thinking quickly to myself, well, if I had to fly from Chicago to New York and stayed in a hotel a couple of days and went to a show, I might have spent $1,000. So I bid $1,000 on the item. Finally, when the item was hammered down, it went for a little over $2,000.
Wow. So you didn't get it.
I didn't get it.
But you got one a couple of months later.
A couple of
3 months later.
I was giving a lecture in 1986 at a huge international philatelic exhibition that was being held here in Chicago. And I showed this postcard and explained what I just explained to you. And a gentleman in the audience raised his hand and said, I bought that cover.
Oh, my.
Turned out to be a rabbi from Los Angeles, and we had a nice conversation afterwards. And he was the one that sort of outbid me on this particular postal item.
Wow. What a story. Wow.
This is the full item here, and you can see in the bottom left-hand corner are directions to people that receive this card, how many stamps they can send to the inmate, what items they could send to them, how many letters they can send in a month or every other month. It's very unusual to find items written from Jews because Jews were generally not permitted to send or receive postcards or letters from the concentration camps. Here we have another postcard, a letter actually from Dachau, and if you look in the middle at the return address, which is going up and down there, you can see that it's addressed to Richard Israel Springer, and we know this is Jewish by the Israel middle name.
Mm-hmm.
Here we have the back of what they call a letter sheet. It's like the aerograms that we now write and send overseas with a stamp affixed to the front. This is the return address on the back, and we can see again that it has Israel as a part of the name there. So we know this is a Jewish item. If we look underneath Israel Ernest Singer, we see his inmate number, and right next to it, it says block, and it says SCHWH. That was short for Schwarzholm, which was the camp that he was assigned to. This was a camp of 1,000 inmates that were taken from the Auschwitz concentration camp and brought to the Sachsenhausen concentration camp outside of Berlin in early 1945 as the Allied bombers were bombing Berlin. And this particular Jewish work camp, their responsibility was to fill in the bomb craters on the roads the next morning after the Allied bombers bombed Berlin. So they would go around the roads around Berlin with dirt and gravel and tar and fill in these bomb craters. Out of the 1,000 inmates that were transferred, less than 12 survived to the end of the war.
Terrible.
And this is one of 10 postal items that were sent that have been recovered from the camp. This is a letter actually addressed to the Buchenwald concentration camp with the Israel middle name, so we know that this was addressed to a Jew. And it's extremely unusual and rare to actually have a letter that survived being sent to a camp, because mostly the guards would pass out the mail, they would read their letters, recover the mail after an hour or so, and tear it up and destroy it. How this was saved, I don't officially know, but I have a theory. If we look at the date is June of 1939. As we know, the Kristallnacht took place in November of 1938, where thousands of Jewish buildings and synagogues were burnt, and thousands of Jews were detained and sent to the concentration camps. For some reason, about 6 months after this event, there was a mass release of Jews. A lot of Jews were permitted to leave the concentration camps with the promise that they would leave Germany. This was the only time in the history of the camps
I didn't even know that
they released people. And my supposition is this person, Moritz Israel Steinhauser, was one of these people that released and somehow secreted this letter on his person and was able to take it out.
Wow.
This is a letter sent from the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp to Stockholm, Sweden. And you can see in the left-hand side it has a hand stamp from the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, which was originally set up as a special camp where the Nazis were going to trade Jews from this camp for German nationals that were being held by Allies. That never really developed, and as we know, the Bergen-Belsen camp became the dumping place for all the Jews at the end of the war. Mm-hmm. Margaret Blake White and some of the other photojournalists went in there right after the war and took pictures of these survivors. And this blue stripe right across the right-hand corner is a chemical dye put on there to see if there's any secret messages hidden in the cardboard of the postcard. You could write a secret message or with invisible ink from urine or citric acid and pen it into the cardboard. It would disappear, and if you held it up to a bright light, the acid would appear, and there would possibly be a secret message in there. This chemical dye also shows if there was any secret writing secreted in the cardboard itself. Here's a postcard sent from Birkenau, which was the middle camp in Auschwitz, where the gas chambers were placed. As you know, when the Jews pulled into Birkenau, they got off the cattle cars and were marched up to the plaza there, and some were sent to the camps and to the gas chambers, and some were sent to the work camps. In September of 1943, 5,000 Czechoslovakian Jews were sent to the Birkenau concentration camp, and for some reason they were put into a special family camp that was established here. This was going to be a camp that the Nazis were going to bring the Red Cross advisors and inspectors in to show them, just like they did for the Theresienstadt camp, where they brought the Red Cross in and showed this is how we treat our Jews. They had fixed up the camp and it looked nice, and they put on plays and concerts. They were going to do the same thing. So these 5,000 Jews were permitted to establish a community and set up schools. One of the requirements that they had to do was write postcards and send as many postcards as they could to their friends, telling them that they were happy and that they were alive and they were living in this wonderful family camp. On March 6th of 1944, every person in the camp was given several postcards to write. All these postcards were collected after they were written, and the next day the Nazis gassed all 5,000 of these Germans, these German Jews or Czechoslovakian Jews, and they sent out these postcards for months after these people were gassed, so that the people that received them still thought they were alive.
Oh, terrible.
Here's a postcard that's from a Judenlager, a special Jewish camp. If you look in the left-hand side of the card, it says Judenlager. This was a camp made up specifically of Jews. Here's a postcard sent to the Theresienstadt ghetto concentration camp that was set up outside of Prague, Czechoslovakia. This is a card sent to the Theresienstadt camp, and it says Zurück, or return. The person that it was addressed to is no longer in that camp, and the card was returned by order of the Judenfonds, the Jewish Committee for the problem, the Jewish problem, returned this postcard to its sender. Oh boy. There was a special camp set up outside of Prague, Czechoslovakia, called Hagibor. Somehow the other previous slide didn't drop, and there was a card addressed to Hagibor concentration camp. And when I acquired this struck me as unusual because Hagibor is a Jewish word for strength. I mentioned this and I showed this card, and unfortunately it didn't drop, at a stamp club meeting that I attended, and a gentleman in the audience raised his hand and said, I know what Hagibor was. It was a special soccer camp that was set up before the war outside of Prague, where Jewish youth from all over Europe went to play soccer, and he was one of those Jewish youth that played in this camp. What the Nazis did was use this particular camp to make it a special camp for spouses of mixed marriages. The Jewish spouses were sent to this camp, and they were permitted to write postcards, and as you can see, they were only permitted to write 30 words, and each of the words had to be numbered. As you can see, on top of the words, there are numbers to indicate the number of words.
How do you find out information like that?
That's interesting. I didn't know this, and I wound up going down to Spertus College, and I spent the whole day down there doing research. They have a wonderful collection of reference material on the Holocaust, and I spent an afternoon going through books and finally, in one book, I found a very small paragraph about this camp, and it mentioned
and the numbers
about
and the
numbers
cards.
and that. This is from Lichtenstadt, one of the ghettos set up in the right outside the general government in Poland. This is another returned item that says that letters and postcards can't be written in Hebrew and Yiddish because the language of the censors was German. Here we have a card sent to the Red Cross in Krakow trying to locate a Jewish individual, and as you can see that it's stamped on their Juden, and it was returned to the center because Jewish people weren't very important to find.
Unbelievable. This has been just a most amazing journey going through these. I never would have thought that looking at postcards or stamps would be so interesting as this. I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show, Dr. Gordon, because this has been most informative and interesting and sad at the same time, of course. I just wish you much success in your hobby and in your presentations, because obviously the presentations that you do are from your heart to share your history and information with the people around you. And I just want to thank you again. I want to thank you, all our viewers, for being with us. I want to thank Dr. Justin Gordon for such an interesting postal historical presentation, and remind you that we're on here on Taped with Rabbi Doug every week at this time. And thank you again, Dr. Gordon. Thank you again for being with us. And we hope someday to talk to you again about this, because I think it's most interesting. And hope to see you next time here on Taped with Rabbi Doug. Shalom.
Von Himmel am Madonna bist du mir zugeschickt. Mein Glück hab ich gefunden, wenn ich hab dich gewinnen. Du scheinst wie tausend Sinnen, hast mein Herz beglückt. Deine zähnlich weiße Perlen mit deinen schönen Augen, deine händlich, deine herrlich, aus mich zugezeugen, schön wie die Levone, richtig wie die Sterne von Himmel am Madonna, bist du mir zugeschickt.